friends. Welcome to episode 328 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian, having finished my 18th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me on Facebook. On X, formerly known as Twitter, my handle is at LMS_United. On Threads, you can find me at School Librarians United, and on Blue Sky at SLU Podcast, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. Friends, it is now my pleasure to introduce the sponsor to our podcast, Junior Library Guild. What if I told you that there's a collection development service that can save you time and increase title circulation rates? Junior Library Guild does that and more. With their team of experienced library media specialists and publishing industry professionals, every title they recommend is vetted for my readers and organized into categories based on reading level and interest. Ultimately, Junior Library Guild helps my students foster a love of reading. Use the code UNITED15 to receive 15 free books in your first shipment. Friends, this week, 3 school librarians left the United States and touched down in Nairobi, Kenya, with the dream of building a school library. Episode 311, Librarians Building Libraries, recorded this past March, features Tom Bober, Amanda Jones, and Andrea Trudeau. In this conversation, we learn more about the planning and funding and logistics, which would culminate in a 3-week trip. I am very lucky to be receiving regular updates and can share with you that Tom, Amanda, and Andrea are in Kenya, and they're making their way to the school where they will spend most of July setting up a library for those lucky students of the Jane Adeni Memorial School. I am happy to report that Tom, Amanda, and Andrea have asked to return and share their story with our listening audience in the next few months. I know I'm not alone in wishing these generous librarians well in all their efforts and a very safe journey home. And now for today's episode, Fulbright Teacher Exchange, and my conversation with Dr. Samantha Hull. Friends, I'm so excited. Sam Hull, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
So, Sam, we have a one-of-a-kind, very first two-parter. This conversation is going to finish after the school year is over. Right now, friends, it is January, and I don't know where you are in the country, Sam, but we're going to get into it. Right now, we're in a polar vortex, and it's about 19 degrees, and it's wholly unpleasant. But when you and I finish this conversation, it will be June.
And hopefully it'll be a lot warmer, but maybe not quite as warm where I might be coming back from in June.
Exactly. So, friends, Sam is ready. She's going on an adventure. Sam, would you please introduce us, tell us about your current role, and we'll start from there.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I'm also in a very cold situation at the moment. I'm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I am a high school librarian, but also the district supervisor in Effort Area School District. So I get to see K through 12 on a pretty regular basis. However, that's not quite where I will be this spring. Would you like me to share?
Absolutely, yes, because you're going on an adventure.
I sure am. So I'm going to leave the cold of Pennsylvania for a slightly colder cold in Jyväskylä, Finland for 5 months, where I will be doing a Fulbright grant with their Distinguished Award in Teaching program. And I'm going to be doing some research, but it's really going to allow me the opportunity to get into K through 12 schools across not just Finland, but opportunities in other European schools as well as libraries. And it's not new or common for school librarians to have this experience. Often, typical classroom teachers, general classroom teachers, or specialists in math and science really lean into these programs. So I'm very excited to dig into the library side of things in this work.
Wow. So, how did you learn about this opportunity? I mean, I've heard of Fulbright before, but I never was aware that you could just leave your job for a fairly significant part of the school year.
It's quite complicated. And to be clear, the Fulbright program actually started, I think, in the 1950s, named after Senator Fulbright, who initially believed in this like cross-cultural exchange with Americans and other countries, right? And often it was professionals, perhaps professors rather, or scientists where they could share what America is doing and learn from the country and exchange. And ultimately just show maybe how alike we are as humans, but where we can have some differences where we can all benefit. The program has really ballooned. I think there's something like 800 different awards and programs. So the specific one that I applied for is a longer term assignment. It can be anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And I think the year I applied, the cohort I was in, there were 11 participating countries. Obviously, different countries elect to participate or not, depending on their situation. So people in my cohort are going everywhere from Morocco to Singapore to Brazil to Finland, of course. It's a little sticky. In Pennsylvania, there is a Pennsylvania state code that allows for a sabbatical leave. And usually that's for people to work on graduate work. So there's been a lot of behind the scenes conversations before I apply, during my application with my superintendent to make sure that my leave would be approved and granted and not on full pay leave, which was a challenge for me as I tried to work through it, both financially, but also on principle. I'm going to be doing a lot more work than, taking 3 graduate classes while not teaching. So that is a really kind of tricky thing that teachers, K through 12 teachers, have to navigate, not only finishing their application and getting the award, but also working with their home district to secure a leave and maintain, benefits or years of service as well.
I imagine this is where it really is going to be on sort of a case by case basis, because depending on your union, if you have one, and again, if you're at the collegiate level, having a sabbatical is something that's far more common, but I think you have to be concerned first and foremost that there's going to be a job waiting for you when you come home.
Right, especially in our field. We school librarians always get a little nervous, right, in April. Like, why does the supervisor need a meeting with me? Why do I have to go to the district office? And that's just a really sad reality of our positions. And that was something I wanted to make sure no matter what my situation was with leave, that there would be somebody filling in at least part-time to prove that we need, as many people as we do to do the job we do for our staffs, for our students, and for the district.
Well, and I like it. It sounds like you have an elegant solution. You're very fortunate to find somebody who would be a good stand-in while you are off gallivanting in Finland.
Yeah, we were perfect timing, as these things go. We had a librarian retire last year who was happy to retire, and I think she was ready, but had some moments of hesitation. So she was so thrilled to be able to come back as a midterm sub and really provide that consistency for our students. She knows a lot of our students and our program. So we did get really lucky in that situation.
Well, and I know you're not alone. It is a great solution when you can bring somebody in who is a certified school librarian, but retired. And so I think for those short-term stopgaps, it sounds like a great way to sort of assure your entire school community that they are going to be okay while you are off on your adventure. A little bit about this timeline when you applied, because I think there are a lot of people who are like, okay, so when did this all start?
So the long version is I've been wanting to do this before, in the before times, right? Before the pandemic. Actually, before I had my second child, I was trying to get my superintendent to agree to this kind of obscure leave. And he said no. I think it was 2017. And just wouldn't hear wouldn't hear from me. So then I had a baby, then COVID, and then, all the fun other things that libraries have been busy with in recent years. And I finally decided I needed to be rejuvenated and revamped if I'm going to stay in this role. And I dug up some of my old files and finally got a meeting with my superintendent. And that meeting took place in August of 2023. I'm trying to get my math correct. In 23. So I prepped him and he finally was on board with the situation. I was not confident I was going to get the award. I knew how prestigious it was. It's sort of rare. And it was funny because although we don't always see eye to eye, he was like, no, with your resume, you're gonna get this award. And so that was, touching whether he meant it or not. And fast forward, applications generally go live around December and are due in February. And this is a pretty typical cycle for this specific program, the Distinguished Award in Teaching Fulbright program. And so I had to have my application in by February. And I got an email actually while we were at the Pennsylvania School Librarians Association conference in the Poconos in April. And the email said in April, "You've made it to the next round." And I'm like, oh, I didn't know there were rounds. I was like, okay, like this is good news. I'm, still in it. And then I waited a painful 3 months to the point where I'm checking my email every week, every second. I have to tell myself not to check my email. I got to the point by the end of June, July, I was almost like ill. I had to stop checking my email. I actually had an opportunity to go to the American Library Association conference in San Diego at the end of June, which was a wonderful distraction. And I got home and took my dog for a walk, came back and checked my email just one more time to find out the wonderful news that I was one of the awardees for this program. So as far as the application process, it can be painful, but it is funded through the Educational Cultural Affairs Office. So as we know, things in government tend to move a little slow, but good news is worth waiting for.
So forgive me, that funding, it sounds like it is going to pay for your experience, but is your district still providing like your health insurance and your salary? How is this all happening?
Great question. Yeah. So the funding through the Educational Cultural Affairs Office through Congress they very clearly say it is not meant to supplement your salary, because most people will still have to pay, mortgage or rent, what have you, at home while also living abroad. And obviously other fees happen. The flight alone, right? Different educational experiences or conferences, traveling to and from schools, just general living expenses. And that's all kind of calculated based on the country, the time of year. There's even for Finland, a dependent stipend. I mean, it's not large, but my children will be coming with me more than 80. Well, they'll be with me full time. But if they're with the person more than 80% of the time, there's a little bit more that gets into this award letter. So it will help me cover my living expenses while I'm gone. My employer has agreed to pay me half pay and maintain my years of service as well as health insurance. So between everything, it'll be a tight spring, but certainly worth dipping into the savings account for.
I was going to say a life-altering experience, career-defining. When you wrote your application, what is it precisely that you wanted to accomplish in going on this adventure?
Without having the Fulbright, website in front of me, the idea of this program is to learn about another country's and culture's educational system, and you'll end up sharing, right, what's going on in America as well. I chose Finland when I wrote my application because I knew that they had a generally renowned education system. I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more detail as I've already sort of preliminary started some research. But they also have a really renowned library system. And I thought that was really interesting that they have these two education adjacent, really great programs that the public uses and depends on in various ways. As I was doing my research for my application, I was not finding a lot about school libraries and school librarians. And I wasn't sure if that was, maybe things that were hidden or that I couldn't read because it was in Finnish or Swedish. But it turns out there's not a ton of school librarians there. So my research is really geared toward the collaboration that happens or doesn't happen with teachers and librarians and what that looks like at various stages, as including the pre-service stage for teachers and librarians when they're in their university training, as well as in-service training, and who and why teachers and librarians are collaborating. My children, I mentioned, will be going with me, so they'll be in the Finnish school system, and their school has the city libraries like in the same building. In some ways that makes sense. I have to, be very careful that I'm not writing any of us out of a job. I promise I won't do that. But I think there's a lot to learn in that kind of unique collaboration for people who maybe don't know or have experience with what librarians can offer.
Well, I will tag on to that. In our community, we have 3 branch libraries, and all 3 of them are within spitting distance of a school. 2 of them are physically attached to our middle school. So we have 3 middle schools, and 2 of those middle schools, they connect to what is now one of the branches of the public library. I see that as satisfying both the school's needs and the community needs. I'm so excited because it sounds like you aren't giving, I mean, the idea of having to be away from my family is just like gut wrenching. And so I love that it sounds like your family is going to be able to enjoy this shared experience with you. Friends, I did a quick search and just a real quick Google search, and the literacy rate for the United States is 79%. The literacy rate for Finland is 100%. And I happen to know for a fact that this is not unusual in Nordic countries. I know that Iceland is also 100% a literacy rate as well. And I think there's no coincidence that it's because you have such a few number of hours of light during a significant part of your year. But I would love to see how the culture of reading is in the schools that you visit when you are supporting a community with 100% literacy. There has to be some sort of value on reading that is across the entire spectrum of Finnish in residents, because you have this high rate of literacy.
And Finns don't only have that high rate, the top rate of literacy, they also have something like a 97% user rate of the public library. So these are people who are maybe not even in school anymore, but still really value entertainment or education in different ways. That's one of the things I'm most excited about my research. A lot of my peers in my cohort we'll spend a lot of time visiting different schools and talking to teachers and students, and that's wonderful, as well as, university. But I have that special third place, the library, that I'll be able to spend a lot of my time doing observational research, enjoying the library myself. The Finns were one of the first people that were allowing borrowing of like unique things, right? Where the library of things came from. So, you need ski poles, go to the library. You need a cake pan, go to the library. So I am really interested to see some of like the big, like the Oda library, what does that look like in Helsinki? But at a more practical level, what does my neighborhood library look like? And who's using it and why and when and how? And a lot of those things that really branch outside of the classroom walls.
Sam, I'm so excited for you. I will say you also are Dr. Hull. I forgive me, but I realize halfway through this conversation I should have addressed you. You are Dr. Hull. So I have to wonder, is any of this going to overlap or intersect with what you pursued with your doctorate?
My doctorate is in instructional design and technology, which is adjacent, right, to education, but it's not necessarily specific to libraries. However, I did a lot of, or my dissertation specifically was on applying, without getting too in the weeds, right, was on applying a communication theory to public library outreach, right? So how do you get non-users, essentially, of the library to know about the things that the library does beyond the stereotypes. And I think tangentially that really bleeds into what I've always tried to do, even as we fought the culture wars, right, in libraries with censorship, intellectual freedom, and book banning issues. I said from the beginning, if they just listened to what I did as a school librarian, what you do as a school library, why school libraries exist, and what the value and importance of them are, you wouldn't be having this conversation at the school board meeting or on Facebook or wherever. It is so essential to what we do, not just in school libraries, but libraries as a whole, the value that it really brings, even in non-democracy, the democratic values that are really important to just progress as a human.
Absolutely. I can't wait to hear about your adventures when we reconnect in June. So, Dr. Hull, I know that if there's a possibility, will you be posting anything on social media? Can we include you in our PLN just to sort of see what is going on? Do you have a preferred social media platform?
Yeah, I actually created a specific Instagram handle just for this account. It's at Opt Into Adventure. It's something that I thought deserved its own handle. I'll probably cross both with my personal account as well, but it'll become a digital scrapbook of sorts, right, of our journeys, both with me and my family, but also, what's going on in the research world and in libraries.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I wish you and your family an amazing trip, and I look forward to reconnecting this summer.
Thank you.
Sam Hull, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you.
It is July 1st, and I had to go back and find out we recorded our sort of intro on January 7th. We are planners. I'm very proud of us.
Yeah, a lifetime ago.
Yes, especially for you, because while I stayed at home here in Michigan, you've had quite an adventure.
I sure did. Yeah, 3 days later, I hopped on a plane with my family, and we touched down in Finland and didn't get back until June 14th.
I'm sorry, but that, for me, that is more than a semester of school. So our semester ends the end of January, and we go till the 12th of June. You were gone longer than that. Wow.
Thanks for acknowledging that. Actually, it was longer than a semester. So yeah, my sabbatical technically didn't start, until 2 weeks later. And of course, I got home about a week after the teachers got out as well. So yeah, there was a lot of extra planning and work, not to mention, we know we don't ever stop working on nights and weekends.
Can I just, when I'm thinking about your experience, I want to say you like put your life on pause. Like you put your current life on pause to completely upend it. You've taken your 2 children with you, which is... That's impressive, because I got to tell you, that would have been an interesting conversation with my husband to be like, yeah, I could take the kids or leave the kids. Was that ever up for discussion? That's where I'm like, was that ever up for debate, or were you quite set on what you wanted to do?
I think because of some experiences I had, not quite as young as them, they're very lucky and fortunate, but some experiences I had as a young person to see the world, to see our country, and my husband too, not quite as extensive, but when we found out, there was conversations before the grant was approved or I was selected, but they were funny fantasy conversations. And when the grant, actually, I think it was like this day or maybe the 2nd or 3rd of July last year when I found out. And shockingly, it wasn't a conversation. It wasn't a conversation for me, or it wasn't a lengthy conversation for me to take the kids. Them going was sort of never up for debate. The question was, how can my partner, my husband, be with us? And if he can't be with us full time, how can we work it out so he can be there? Because both of us believed in this powerful change and shift in trajectory that this would give our kids, that they couldn't not go. They're also, when we left, my daughter was 6, my son 8. She turned 7 while we were there, but it was the perfect age too. They weren't quite involved with like all the club and teams and all the things, that it was a sweet spot to be able to pause this life, like you said, try something else, experience something else. And even schooling, right? Like in Pennsylvania, we just had to unenroll them, and then we'll give them their finished report cards, but they'll just be re-enrolled and re-enter as if they weren't gone at all. So it really was not a conversation about, are they going? It's who else is going to support me. And so AJ, my husband, we got to see him 5 times. So he flew to Europe 5 times. I don't want to show you my credit card statement, but I will tell you that we got points. We played the point system a lot. So he was able to join us at different places sometimes. And I have a wildly supportive village. I had a lot of friends and family. My mom came for 5 weeks. So we really made an adventure out of it, not just for our immediate family, but our extended village.
I am so glad, because it really, I think you would have been terribly lonely.
Yes.
If you had gone.
And I was. There were moments that I was.
And by yourself. And I would have seen there have been some moments of just, I miss my old life. And this way, what a better compromise, especially because you have full support of your family. Let's back up just for a minute. When you left for Finland, which was, you said, the first week of January, in just a few short weeks was the inauguration of Trump. And I never want to ever politicize this podcast platform, but something relevant happened which really concerned a lot of people in your position, because federal programs were almost slashed overnight. Let's just, cut money that went to things that for decades, forgive me, the Fulbright Exchange is not a new program.
Not at all.
Well-established.
40s, 50s.
Yes, well-established, time-honored, and friends will put links in the show notes. But, the Fulbright is an esteemed program, highly regarded, and to question whether or not that was going to get funding. But you were actually already in the country. You were already in Finland. My colleague from my building was leaving the week of the inauguration or something like that. It was really sort of touch and go. All of us, I remember sitting at a staff meeting going, oh my gosh, is Dave going to get to go? Is Dave going to get to go? And meanwhile, I'm like, what about Sam? Because you would have already been there. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my gosh, is everything okay? And so to have something so out of left field, even potentially jeopardize this plan that has been in the works for more than, 9 or 10 months. I mean, right. Really, when it came to you conceiving and planning and dedicating your time and bandwidth to this undertaking.
Yeah, it was something that was shocking for sure, especially as I'm still trying to get my feet under me in this, new country. Luckily at that point, my partner was still with me. He moved over with us for 2 weeks. So I could have a minute to just grasp what's going on. Luckily, the specific Fulbright I'm in, and by specific, I mean the specific award I got, which is available for all K through 12 educators with 5 years experience. Again, links in the show notes. It's the Distinguished Award in Teaching, and it's a research grant. And I went to Finland. Those 2 components are what really allowed me to feel really safe while we were there. Our entire grant, this was scary in the moment, we got at the beginning. I got a day before I left, which was what do I do with that? We hid it in a savings account. So I got all my money initially. So that was helpful because of how that program works. But additionally, the Fulbright Finland Foundation is a private organization. And it really depends what country you are going to, how they fund, and how they partner with the U.S. A lot of American Fulbright grantees who go to Finland are getting $70 plus percent funded by the Finland Fulbright Foundation. I knew some other Fulbrighters in other countries who were sent home because the money wasn't there anymore and they weren't getting the lumps. They didn't get the lump sum at the beginning. It was monthly or biweekly. That was another trend. They shifted to weekly payments if they were getting monthly, so it could cut off sooner. But it's really important to recognize before you would apply for one of these programs, and I didn't know this before, and who would have thought you needed to know it, that you understand a little bit about the country you're going to, not just culturally, but is it a Fulbright commission, or is it through the embassy, or do they have their own foundation? How are they funded? What happens if there's no funding from the U.S. side while I'm there? I was lucky enough, again, my village is deep and wide. I adjunct at Old Dominion University, and my department chair was calling and saying, do you need money for a plane ticket home? I will divert department funds. And I was like, I'm good, thank you. It was emotional on a lot of levels, but it's good to understand how Fulbright works now, that we need to, and how that country works, and maybe to have a village behind you who's willing to divert funds. Again, I say this from a place of such privilege, and I recognize that, but I hope some of these learned experiences or just tips and tricks can help people continue to do the really important work of exchanging.
When you and I talked in the first week of January and could not have expected the slash and burn of the federal funding that would and is still happening. Again, friends, I do not mean to politicize this platform, but it is no small secret that there are a lot of things that were funded before the inauguration that are no longer being funded. And I'm simply trying to apply this in the context of our conversation that while you went into the application process without that burden, or concern, I think that at least in the next 3 years, American Fulbright exchange applicants need to be a little leery about the certitude. Is that a word? About the certainty? How about the certainty of the funding that is being allocated at the national level? For clarification, when you wrote your proposal, it was country specific.
Yes. There's a lot of Fulbright programs for different people for different reasons. And often there are host countries that have latched on to that. So in my cohort, there were originally 18 other teachers who were selected. Some have since dropped out. Someone who was going to go to Vietnam in the fall, that trip has been canceled for political reasons. So she doesn't get to go, not on her choice. So we're down to like 16 teachers, and there were 11 host countries. You can't just be like, ooh, I've never been to the Netherlands. There's specific host countries, and your research should be tied. Your research proposal should be tied to that country, and that's definitely a big tip and trick. When you're writing these applications, it should be clear that you're not, again, wanting to just be a traveler. Like, why specifically that region? How is that going to not only further your research, but they say exchange not because, a librarian wasn't sent back to take my place, but there was an exchange in ideas and understanding that they got from me when I did some of my interviews and observations and resources that I shared with them, as I was able to bring some of their ideas, resources back home.
I think in my naive assumption was a Fulbright exchange means you're going over there and they're sending somebody in your place, and it's like you're like swapping houses, and it's not that at all. So no, I mean, when they say Fulbright exchange, teachers are moving, but it's not like a one for one, like you leave your space and somebody comes and fills it while you're gone.
Correct.
It's not that.
I think programs did exist like that at one point. You can imagine a logistical nightmare. And probably programs outside of Fulbright exist like that. But this is an exchange of ideas, resources. And again, the history of Fulbright in general is that we can share information and resources with others to strengthen, relationships. Because spoiler alert, as different as our ideas and cultures and ways we go about things as humans, we're a lot similar than we are different. I had so many moments where I was observing classes and I was like, you're the Finnish version of that kid. Yep, that's the Finnish version of that teacher. It was almost giggle inducing as I was like, oh my, we are the same.
That's hilarious. Well, and again, the important thing is that there are people like you who are willing to put your life at home on pause to go and engage in something wholly unfamiliar. And there are inherent risks involved. But I am dying to know what your children thought of Finnish school. And friends, I'm going to put this out there. If you've been listening long enough, if you've heard me talk, I spent, I was probably 6 months old when we moved to Japan. And we moved back to the States permanently when the summer I was turning 12. So I lived overseas with my family. We started off in Japan, and I obviously went to school in all of these places that we went. So I was in Japan until I was 3. I went to the Philippines until I was 5. And then I went to Guam until I was almost 7. And then from that point until I was going into the 6th grade, I was in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. I attended American schools. I was not a military kid. My father was in international finance. The wonderful thing about that, I only say, is because I didn't live on a base. I didn't have military privileges. I didn't have commissary privileges. And so it was a different experience from that respect. So I put some context on there. But I did go to American schools, and my ability to understand other languages is nil. But I did take a lot of especially when I lived in Jeddah, we had Arabic studies. And Arabic studies was like a special. So you would go and have Arabic studies. And there is no small coincidence that when I graduated from high school, I wanted to be a social studies teacher because of my experiences outside of the United States. So,
yeah.
Right. Cool.
And I'd love to circle back into how that, shapes those young experiences my kids are different than they'll ever be, and we'll never know who they would have been without this experience. And I think that's a good thing. They have such a broad understanding of their place in this big world. They understand, and they're 7 and 8. So don't get me wrong. They came home and they were thrilled that Cheetos weren't banned, and they were, they fight, and this is not rainbows and lollipops over here, but they understand better now that, they get to eat food that they want, not always what they want, broccoli's on the table, but they have food to eat. They have a house. They have an understanding of their problems and a contextualization of their place in the world, which you can't manufacture. And we are so lucky that we were able to provide that for them. It was important for me that the kids went to Finnish public school, and the Fulbright Foundation in Finland helped support that vision. Public schools are amazing, and I want to experience what it's like to be a parent of a Finnish public school student. And so we found a public school. It was in a location in the city where a lot of graduate students, so most of these are families, lived, and a lot of them were international. So they had some familiarity with students who were not Finnish. My son, who in America was in 2nd grade, got to be in 2nd grade in the Finnish public school system. And at that level, they had an English immersion program, which they had a spot in. So most of his courses were in English. Of course, they took Finnish, so that's in Finnish. In grade 2, you could take religion or ethics. And he got to choose. He chose ethics, and that also was in Finnish. And of course, they've learned a lot of songs in Finnish for performances and fun. And my daughter, who was 6 at the time, and Finns don't start their primary schooling until age 7. So she was enrolled in what they call preschool is the translation, which was, at first I was like, oh my gosh, she was in grade 1 here. I'm like, oh my God, this is not going to be good. We brought this many like piles of workbooks because I thought I was going to have to like homeschool her as well. And preschool is not available in English. So my daughter had full Finnish school. Luckily, her class had 9 different heritage language students. And what I mean by that, out of the 16 kids in her class, there were 9 kids whose first at-home language was not Finnish. Usually, the second language a lot of kids learn happens to be English because their parents, have picked that up as like a universal business and education language. A lot of them could also speak Finnish. These are 6-year-olds I'm talking about who have acquired 3+ languages. The language was a barrier. I often tell the story that my son is exceptional and could pick things up. Like he decided he wants to be a translator. So wonderful, awesome. He's like, can you sign me up for Arabic lessons? But he absorbed it through his friendships and, we can all count to 10 in Finnish and they can sing the songs and I can ask for coffee. That's where I'm at. It was a wonderful experience. But the tiny things that they really appreciated and I could witness and they could see was they loved taking their frickin' shoes off and not wearing shoes during the day. And a lot of time, this is because you're wearing boots, right? But I'm saying, like, Amy, I had to take my shoe. Since my daughter was in preschool, you had to drop them off because Finland's very independent. My son, 2nd grade, well, he can go to school himself, doesn't matter. But since I had to take her, I had to take my shoes off to take her to her classroom, which was, I can see why, but I was like, every day, I'm like, I'm not even tying these shoes now. I'm just slipping them off. They absolutely loved that they could not wear shoes at school. And a lot of it, again, is because they're boots and it's messy and it helps keep the school clean. Teachers often wear indoor shoes, so they have something on their feet. But there's a lot of sock-footed kids bouncing around the school, and the school is very clean. And I think it is a level of comfort, and that's something they're going to try to talk to their principal about. And I said, I think the fire codes in our state might not allow it, but go for it.
The language acquisition for young children is well documented. That children, the earlier you can introduce your children into bilingual, multilingual arenas, they pick up languages. And it is singularly the one regret I have from living until I was almost 12 in several different countries. I picked up all the cultures. I learned a lot about what it's like to live in those countries, the religion, the practices, and a respect for how people do things that might be different from my way of doing something, but an acceptance and understanding of others and how they live their lives. I'm curious to know, what was that like? You went into Finnish schools in addition to the ones your children were attending, is that right?
Well, first and foremost, I think the most shocking thing is you can just walk in right off the street. The doors are opened. Usually the translation was janitor, but it was like a custodian. But again, not the way we think of it. It was maybe like a front desk secretary, attendance person, but they never even looked up, when I would just walk into a building. So doors are open. You could just walk in. There's no sign-in. There's no badges. It very, very open. So that's a wild thing to us in America for a lot of reasons. You will often see students out and about. That's because even at the secondary level, upper secondary level, which for us would be high school, they don't usually work more than an hour without a 15-minute break. And that was another thing my kids absolutely loved because littles would, and some of the older kids too, go outside. So it doesn't matter it could be -20 Fahrenheit. It could be snowing and they're outside for those 15 minutes. And they do have longer breaks than that as well. But the breaks. So I would walk into the high school and upper secondary school. I didn't realize it was break time. They're playing ping pong in the hallway, just walking around. Some are going outside. Some went down to the kiosk to get a candy bar, even though they have free hot lunch at school. It is a hustle and bustle in all the good ways that we sometimes think that, American high schools could be like. I got to observe lots of different classrooms live from second grade up to their last year of school. And so I even got the opportunity to watch, we would call them student teachers, teach, and then the critique that happens after student teachers with the college professor, with the classroom teacher, with other student teachers. Got to witness a lot of that. But uniquely, because of my project, I also got to observe these classes in the public library. So when they would come to the public library for different lessons or opportunities, I got to watch, first graders getting their library cards at the public library and that structured lesson. I got to watch eighth graders get a lesson from the public librarians about information literacy and then do a pseudo escape room scenario. So it was broad and deep in how I got to observe students in action. For research purposes, I chose not to interview students as often. It becomes a little bit of a nightmare with minors, but I also got to go in and talk to librarians and teachers, administrators. The very few school librarians that I could find, I got to chat with as well and get some deeper, richer aspects and conversations. So I was all over the place. I ended up doing 3 case studies. So not just in the city I lived in, but 2 other locations in the country as well, just to compare and contrast how public libraries are really supporting the compulsory education in Finland.
You're mentioning that there weren't many school librarians to talk to. Mm-hmm. And is that, I'm sort of figuring out what the causal effect is there aren't many school librarians because the public librarians have this expectation that they are integral to the neighborhood schools.
So I'll be honest, when I wrote my research proposal, I wanted to learn more about the Finnish school library system, right? How does it work? What is their role? And when I was writing this proposal, it was clear, right? I'm doing pre-research. We're librarians. And I couldn't find a lot. And I thought, maybe it's just not on the internet or it's in Finnish or, and they accepted my proposal. So they have to exist, right? And then I'm in Finland and there's no, there's actually not school librarians. My children's school, for example, under the same roof, there is a neighborhood public library. And that's what they use as the school library. And I'm starting to, I'm like, what? Wait, what? And then I find a school librarian and she says, our association actually ended up, they had a Finland School Librarian Association folded in 2020. I'm like, so you did exist. Yeah. And they've been dwindling. So a lot of this is some of the context that's important to understand here is Finland does have a globally renowned education system. If we look at some of their scores, PISA, the big ones we're familiar with, college readiness, career readiness, if we look at literacy rates, still not bad, but they are going down. What else is going down, right? The numbers of school librarians. And quite frankly, Finland is unique. There's 5.5 million people in Finland. If you're not a numbers person or don't realize population numbers, that is extremely small. They want people to come to their country and become citizens and live there, even though it's a very difficult process. They want the people who are there to stay and have kids and have families. There's not the people there. So that's a problem. They have been open, for the most part, to refugees and other immigration opportunities. So now they also don't have the homogeneity that they had when their numbers were so high. So these people, like librarians, like teachers who support second language acquisition, who support newcomers, is very new to them, and or they cut them and didn't realize the benefit. So much of my work was getting all this information, but was sharing, this is what a school librarian does in America, and here's how you can do it, and here are these resources, and here's what it looks like at the global level, here's what it looks like in my state. It was clear that they recognize that that is a huge gap that they need to fill if they want to, return their literacy and PISA and readiness scores back up, which in some ways I was happy to be able to share something, right? I thought I wasn't walking into a wonderland anymore, but it also was America, school librarians, we are important, globally. And we didn't it was nice to like pat myself on the back and all of us on the back, because the work we do is important and people are looking at us. And I didn't even realize that people were looking to us and what we're doing and the importance of our role across the spectrum from, like I said, college readiness and literacy rates, but like another trusted adult and a safe place to be.
I'm thinking a lot of listeners are Googling the population of their state.
I'm sure. And they're going to be like,
how many live here? And I was like, so, and I think for context, that's always interesting because we are 50 states. Finland is one country. And so the comparison is not fair.
Right.
But I don't think it can be overstated just how successful Finnish public education is, because the country, like many Nordic countries, boasts a near 100% literacy rate.
Yes.
So you're doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to get a visual because in some of our neighborhood schools in the community I live in, 100 years ago, the school housed the library that also was available to the community. Over the last 100 years in my community, those public entities have since relocated to spaces that are not embedded within the larger school building. But the libraries are always within very close proximity to public schools. I know there are some librarians who lament how close the school is to the library because you have a supervision nightmare when students aren't old enough to drive themselves home. So that's a whole nother episode. And by the way, that's a public librarian problem. I don't see that nearly as vitally important where my students go after 3:00.
I mean, to that point, in Finland, I mean, I think about the infrastructure differences, which again is a whole other podcast episode. But as a parent, so here's one of these cool experiences. We often got messages from the school principal that were from the public librarians in like our little neighborhood library, like students are not to use computers, or make sure they have headphones on, or we're going to have to limit how many kids are in here, because they were often in there again without adults. And these are even littler kids, because independence starts in the Nordics. But it's funny that, again, to circle back, we're all the same in many ways too.
Yes, I do. I'm very grateful that you mentioned that independence starts young, because I think that we tend to, it's very hard to imagine giving our own children that kind of independence, but a conversation for another episode.
Yes.
Let me ask you, as a Fulbright exchange teacher, you were not teaching in Finland, but you were conducting research. And can you shed some light on the role that school librarians have, and also this solution that the Finns have of using public librarians in the schools? What other aspects of research were you delving into when you were in Finland?
That's a great question, Amy. I think I went into it thinking, this is what it's going to look like. Getting into different schools and connecting with different librarians in my own way, in ways that were supported by advisors or the foundation or people I met, took time. I struggled too with not having a schedule. And I have to tell you, folks, I took a sabbatical, a half-pay sabbatical from work. So I'm not dealing with school stuff, right? And I'm not teaching every day like you mentioned. Here's another reason I brought my kids with me. If I didn't have to wake up and get them to school and have to pick them up, I didn't know this then, but I would have struggled, right? Like, where do I have to be when? And I can take my time doing that. This gave me I have to wake up at 7:15, get them to school. Okay, maybe I'll go grocery shopping because, you have to schlep it all by yourself and that's annoying with children. And then I'll work on this, or I'll go interview this person, or I'll go to this school. And then I got to be back because I got to pick the one up from school. And again, they didn't grow up with the independence. So do I let the 8-year-old come home by himself? I don't know. So just, I had a finite time to do that research. And eventually what started to emerge is that there is a national curriculum. So again, in the States, you can think of this as compare everything I say about Finland to your state, right? When I say national, just think state. Finland has a national curriculum that was last updated in 2016. So I think they're due for an update, right? Even in that 2016 curriculum, there is mention of libraries and other outside educational institutions to support that. What also started to become very clear is the absolute trust in professionals to do their jobs and the absolute trust in parents to do what is best for their kids. So here is a perfect example. One time I was invited into my son's classroom. Valentine's Day is Friends Day, and I guess parents are friends for second graders. So parents are invited into the classroom. Daughter wasn't feeling well. She had hurt her back. A whole other story. So we were there together, and she wasn't looking good. I knew we had to go to the doctor. And so I got up in the middle of this second grade class, pulled not only my daughter, who was just with me as a guest, and my son, and we walked out and I waved, because I'm frantic at this point. And I messaged the teacher later, and the teacher said, "Oh, it's okay. I trust your decision-making as a parent. Like, you don't need to explain why you did what you did." And I saw that way, but I also saw in friends I made with Finnish families, like, they were like disgusted by the messages that teachers now felt that they kind of had to send to parents. They're like, "No, you deal with it. You have," and in Finland, you must have a master's degree to be a teacher. "You are a professional. You do your job. I'll do my job." So this idea that there's national curriculum and other like Public Library Act and other, legislation to support the trust and autonomy of professionals to do their job is what sort of really became clear and emerging, and how they know they should have school librarians. Sweden, right next door, law demands that there are school librarians. Not that much different, right? Don't let them hear me say that. But, Norway, again, they have school librarians. So they recognize this problem, and their solution to solve it is to partner. What I see, how that translates back to America or your states, is not every school has a school librarian in America. Not every school has a school librarian in Pennsylvania. Those who don't can benefit from public library support, and how those who do can be even better through public library support. The structural support and the way that different cities and areas supported, even though they have infrastructural support where, students can walk and get to libraries, is something that's going to be harder for Americans to adopt. But I think, quite frankly, the more we expose people to what libraries actually do, maybe we wouldn't be in situations where decision makers are making cuts because they've lived that value. So there's like a side reason behind all of this, but it's all genuine. And I think that's why literacy rates are what they are. I think that's why people know in Finland know to go to the library for all sorts of civic services and social services beyond the books. They're widely supported socially, politically, and culturally.
So I know that we'll still use the word air quotes. This was work. Like, you were there on work. I mean, You were working. I appreciate that this is an investment emotionally and of your professional life. What does the culmination of this look like? Because you ultimately are a Fulbright educator. At what point are you done with your obligation to Fulbright? Because I realize while this has consumed your life for more than a year, given when you applied, what does the finished product look like?
That's actually the term the U.S. Fulbright uses, your research project and product. So there was lots of Zoom meetings and trainings with American advisors as well. And I remember a screen at one point. It was like a social media post on one end of the spectrum, a dissertation on the other end of the spectrum. And your project is like here. It's not a dissertation, but it's a lot closer to it than a social media post, right? So they gave you They gave us autonomy to choose what our product would be that we could share. To whatever your product was, you needed to share with the Fulbright Commission and the State Department, and hopefully the Department of Education at the federal level has access and reviews these documents. So that's kind of cool in itself. And then honestly, your choice. After you've submitted it, it's depending on what your product is, depending on is where it lives. Finland Fulbright Foundation tells us we're never done working with them. We will forever be working for them. But as an ambassador of sorts. That made me giggle that I'm never getting rid of them. The U.S. I might get rid of, but the Finnish Fulbright Foundation has their hooks in pretty deep. And they actually just emailed to have my project on their website. So I, type B+ personality, researcher at heart, wrote a paper. And I wrote a paper that I will publish once the commission approves it and get it published in a journal. But then I also was like, that's not it. I realized I needed to share my experience in a variety of ways. So I proposed a session at ASL, which got approved. So if you're going to ASL, you can come chat with me about more Finland things. And then I was like, oh, wait. But if I want to adopt this in Pennsylvania, I need to write a proposal. So then I wrote a proposal that I could share with our state librarian, that I could share with my superintendent, that we could pilot some of these partnerships. And then I was like, who else? Oh, wait, what about the school librarians who won't be at ASL? So I wrote a Knowledge Quest article. And then I was talking to my advisor and I was like, I'll submit the paper. And he was like, what about the other stuff? So I ended up making a portfolio out of all those items and sending that all to Fulbright with the hope that they, will have something to say about it. And maybe it'll live somewhere and someone in 20 years will find it and adopt it, and wonderful. But I decided as a librarian, right, as someone who disseminates information, that I wanted to make sure I wasn't just publishing a paper in a peer-reviewed journal, right? That's not accessible, especially for, it's accessible, right? But it's not something on people's lines and their vision points. So, and I also had a social media account that journaled along our way, our journeys. And so I probably did more than I needed to.
You have the agency to create the best way to sort of utilize the information that you've gleaned.
Yes.
And I love that you see a multitude of avenues by which your experience can translate into valuable perspective for both hardcore academics, but also people like me, who always, the better appreciation we have for how others do the job that we do, whether it's school library or education writ large. I see this as this is always we're moving in the right direction when we learn from others. And, but I do, when you were talking about filing it away, all I can envision, and friends, as a child born and raised in the 70s and early 80s, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, when they're pushing the Ark into this warehouse of infinite capacity putting away the Ark in some repository never to be seen from again. All I could picture was that I was like, oh, you mean in the Raiders of the Lost Ark when the forklift is taking the Ark and turning it down an aisle and storing it away for, to be lost and forgotten, right? And for you, this was a chapter of your life that will forever guide and impact your thinking, and give you that context by which you navigate much of your everyday, and it leaves you changed forever. I love that. And I am inspired. I absolutely am. And while academia and pursuing higher degrees, advanced degrees is not on my journey, I'm glad for you. I'm very glad for you. This is no doubt a bucket list for some educators. Some. This is not for the faint of heart. This is for people who are all in. What advice would you give to anybody tuning in if this is something that they would like to entertain as a goal?
Certainly. Following or getting onto the websites, for Fulbright to understand not just, I recognize that my project was long-term. There are longer ones, okay, but there are also shorter ones. So again, if you're uncomfortable with sabbatical leaves or 6 months, there's 2 and 3 week programs. And don't let Fulbright hear me say this, but there's also other opportunities that allow you to understand and start to interact with others in meaningful ways, because that's all this is. We already do this. We do this with our organizations that, formalize networking. We do this when we find people on Instagram and we, connect with or whatever platform you might be on. So continuing to have an open mind and open ears and Googling that thing you heard and seeing who that person is that was mentioned and what they were doing and looking at names and people and speaking those names and hearing those names and then following up to see who they are and what they're doing is a lot of this work. If you are specifically interested in this type of project, I think getting to know what it is you're interested in researching, what country could benefit from that or would be a good fieldwork ground to do that is also really important to putting together your application. Usually the application for the Distinguished Award in Teaching is due in February and it only opens in December. So I don't know that the questions will change. So certainly asking someone alumni for those questions or just what was that process like? And it was painful, but not the process of actually clickety clack filling out the application and writing my research proposal, but talking to my superintendent about what leave would look like, talking to my family about what leaving the country for 5-6 months would look like, but also preparing yourself for, I'm going to hit submit in February and then might not find out till July. Or, in April, I found out I was finalist. I didn't even know what that meant. I was like, okay, maybe in May, maybe in June, yeah. So understanding that the wheels of everything move slow, but there's a ton of alumni and Facebook groups and different areas where you can get and glean information about people who have been through it, about the different countries, because I love that they kept the word exchange, right? It's not a people exchange, it's an idea exchange. And although it is wildly beneficial to get, boots on the ground and get an immersive experience, there's a lot to be gleaned in simple conversations, whether they're, virtual or in, face-to-face.
Well, and I also, looking into it, realized that Fulbright Exchange isn't always a 5-month commitment. There are other shorter time periods that you can elect to do, which might be far more manageable, even to a 2-week.
Yes.
That was what really sort of struck me as interesting is wow, you could do this not for 5 months, but for 2 weeks.
Exactly.
And I think for some people that might be a sort of, I don't want to call it a compromise, but when we're looking at where we are in our lives, that might be something that is the difference between I can do this and I can't.
Yes.
So no, I absolutely love it. And friends, just to selfishly plug, over the years, I've been very lucky in interviewing librarians outside of the United States. So if you look at the playlists, which are always linked in the show notes, I have interviews with librarians in New Zealand and Canada, the UK, as well as Australia, Saudi Arabia, and Ghana. So yes, if you have some interest, definitely take a look at the conversations with librarians outside of the United States. Sam, I am so grateful. It was fun. You and I saw each other at ALA. That was really cool. It was like, wait, and following up with this, second, conversation, because it means so much now that you've had an opportunity to really reflect on this experience that it really can be life-altering. Certainly, your children will always remember their time spent in Finland, and who knows how that will direct the decisions that they make moving forward in terms of their lives. But thank you so much. I'm very excited that we're going to see each other in St. Louis. This is going to be fantastic. For people who'd like to follow you and include you in their PLN, or also reach out to you and maybe be more specific in the questions that they have to ask about your experience, where would you like people to direct their questions?
I set up a special Instagram account for this trip. It's not a trip, this experience, this opportunity, this journey. And that is probably the best way, short of, an email, but we can link all that later. But the Instagram account is Opt Into Adventure. And the reason I wanted to make sure I verbalized that is because you can choose what you want to opt into. And it was a little bit of a play on what might be currently going on in some things. But if you can, some people say lean in, but you can opt into some really wonderful things and opportunities.
Dr. Hull, I am grateful for your generous time spent. I know you and I just flew back from ALA yesterday. I've got a lot of things waiting for me to do, and I know you do as well. So thank you so much for sharing, and I will see you in St. Louis.
Sounds great. See you then.
Friends, if you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. I hope you take a look at the link to Junior Library Guild in our show notes. Use the code UNITED15 and receive 15 free books with your first shipment. I am currently juggling multiple outlines and tentative recording dates. You can be sure our upcoming episodes will showcase amazing school librarians sharing their strategies and resources. I hope you will tune in.